In this episode, we're talking about ability scores, the concept of quantifying a character's attributes with numbers, and what that means for the story you tell.
And for today's prompt, we think about what it would mean to see your best statistic floating above your head. Yep.
All that and more on this episode of Your Rivers Are Wrong.
Stay tuned.
Good morning, or evening, or afternoon. Whenever you may be, welcome back to the Your Rivers Are Wrong podcast. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Dante.
And I am the other host. My name is Merle.
And we're here, as we are every week, to talk about the wonderful whimsies of world building, the arts and aesthetics of setting up a setting, and telling stories born from it. Isn't that right?
That is right. Very, very right, in fact. Yes.
I'll rephrase that. I am wrapping up basically my birthday week, which is fantastic. My birthday was this past weekend. Had a really good time. Marla is recording today on her birthday.
On my actual birthday. Isn't that crazy? How wild.
I had to text you and be like, hey, do you want to record?
Is that a thing? Like,
isn't tomorrow like an important day?
I always feel kind of weird about birthdays because it's also just a day full of like anything you can do on another day, you can also just do on your birthday, you know? Like there's nothing like physically, spiritually changing for like the day except that it is a milestone, obviously.
Yes, but you could operate because you
could have like
choose
the literal same day,
right?
And then it would still be your birthday, you know?
Like you can't choose what day it lands on, right? It's all it might be a weekday, it might be a busy day. Like you can't really help it. You have to like take the initiative to make it a special day.
Yeah, I know. Right? It's the hardest thing to me, but I feel like the thing that works best is like spontaneous planning with people that are just nearby and just are
it's true.
Happy to hang out, you know? Because if it's more, I don't like the feeling of making big plans and then the stress of maybe not many people showing up, because you never know. Even though you invite everyone and everyone's saying yes, I still get stressy from it. So I love the spontaneous random plans most, which is in fact what I'm doing this afternoon, which is great.
Yeah.
There's like a little cake plan and a little like lazy dinner plan, and it's gonna be very fun.
That's awesome.
Yes.
I don't know if I've ever planned a birthday party where I've stressed about the number of people coming. Like, I don't think I've ever had a party that big that I'm just like, oh, I hope everyone comes. It's more like, hey, if you show up, you show up. We got food. And if you don't show up, more for me. Like, I mean, that was always my mindset.
This is the better mindset that I clearly don't possess yet. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's also a big deal when you make those plans and make sure everyone can make it. And then like day of, maybe they drop out. Like I know that's the situation with like scheduling D&D sessions.
Oh, right.
When you like bend over backwards to make sure you're free on a Thursday on an afternoon. And then everybody's like, actually, that doesn't work for me. And I'm telling you 5 minutes before we start. And then it's like, okay, well.
That sounds about right.
That's something else. And I think with zero segue, we're going to go into the topic for today. As always, we'll talk about one topic related to world building or storytelling and end the episode with a prompt. The topic I have for today is a bit of an interesting one because I don't know if everybody's too familiar with it. I'm sure that there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are very familiar with like the tabletop RPG space, but I can't assume that. I can't assume that you know. So I'm not going to do for the uninitiated what is D&D thing because we've done that 20 times already.
I refer back to the first episode I think that we did ever on what is D&D and all the things about D&D.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Today, I wanted to talk about a concept known in D&D and called other things in other games, the concept of ability scores.
Oh.
They're called attributes, they're called traits, they're called other things in other games. A common concept in tabletop RPGs and even in video games is that you quantify your physical and mental attributes in the form of a set of numbers.
Right.
Very specific numbers. In D&D, people are familiar with the terms strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And that is basically the umbrella 6 words of everything you can do. Everything you can do falls under these 6 words. Those 6 words aren't always the same in every game. And I have some examples of different attributes or ability scores from other games just to kind of get a framework of what this looks like kind of in the space or as other designers work around this. But today I just kind of want to talk about the idea of ability scores, what that means for a story. What do you think the most necessary ones are for a story? Like in general, what do you think is most important? And just like their role, because every time I think about ability scores, it's this not necessarily abstract concept, but it seems very centralizing. It's very foundational to the game working.
Yes. Very much part of the engine, right?
The part of the engine is a great way to say it.
Yeah.
So in other games, I can go over Kids on Brooms. Kids on Brooms has fight, flight, brains, brawn, wit, and charm as their 6, which is kind of the same, but kind of not. If I go to one of my favorite games, Masks, which is a superhero game, their ability scores or traits are danger, freak, savior, superior, and mundane, which is like a totally different ballpark, which we'll
there's
discuss.
a score called freak. What does that even mean? When do you roll for freak or have a good freak?
Because you're a superhero and this is a superhero game, you roll the freak stat when you want to do something that is wildly like unworldly. It's like not natural. So like if you're gonna scare off somebody with your superhero powers, or if you have to do something inhuman, roll freak, you know?
Yeah, makes sense.
Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu has similar stats to the other ones, more basic ones, but they also have luck and sanity as 2 of their core concept ability scores. And the one I want to leave off with before I continue to discuss more is a game that I covered previously on one of my streams called Precious Things, where you play as a group of tiny dragons.
Oh, that's really cute. What the hell?
Their only 2 traits are tiny and dragon. These are the 2 stats. So you can either do things according to tiny or do things according to dragon, which obviously are 2 very, very different things.
Obviously.
Polarizing.
Yes.
2 sides of the spectrum. So just to toss it to you for a bit, do you have an opinion on ability scores when you first saw them? Did you have any opinions on them? And do you have any prevailing opinions on the idea of quantifying an entire person with these values? That's kind of the idea that I kind of want to talk about today. Yeah.
I think I first came across ability scores just in early days when I just was like, what's D&D? I'm going to buy this book for 50 euros. Oh my God, such an investment. And I'm going to learn all about D&D.
That's how it went. That's exactly how it went.
Yeah, that's how it all works, right? Like for everyone. Yeah. And as a absolute newbie being unfamiliar with game engines that work on, I mean, what's the word, right? Characters, personality traits, I guess, sort of scores that inform your choices more or less, or the success of your choices, I should say. I just thought it was very cool. I thought I'm like, wow, I love this game. And then I played it for a shit ton of years. So it makes sense. Now, if we're talking about the specifics, by the way, I love how specific this topic is because it's so nitpicky and nerdy, but it's still very wide because there's so many systems using anything like this, right? So if we're talking about the stats itself, in this case, the D&D stats that I was most familiar, well, actually still am most familiar with.
Yeah.
I think it's very clear that the things they decide to specify are the things that the game is about. So if it's a game where fighting is a big part of your thing, then of course you're going to have like multiple stats that have some sort of theme around physical capability, either in D&D's case, dexterity, strength, you know. I think it's sort of famously difficult thing to grasp when you're not used to it yet, but like the wisdom versus intelligence thing, where it's what is what? Is it both kind of about being smart, or is it like how well you understand the world around you in an instant? Is it like spiritually relevant? But that stuff, that there's a difference between sort of knowledge and innate understanding of the world in a sort of abstract religious / spiritual way. Like that's a thing that
right
that is very specific, I find, to D&D, that they feel the need to specify.
Delineate between the 2. Yeah.
For me, for D&D stats, I find it interesting that there is, at least in the way I used to play, which might not be the most ideal way anyway, but when I would Dungeon Master for groups or people, I would find myself leaning into the substats, right? Like the sort of persuasion, perception, the things that are under the umbrella terms.
Right.
I would lean into very specific ones very often. Like I would do perception checks all the time, and I would very often do things like persuasion over intimidation. I never use intimidation, and it says a lot about me, right? As a game runner, because I think for me, the D&D system is not my most favorite system because parts of it don't really link to my favorite things, right?
Right.
My sort of preference in storytelling or whatever. It's still a great system, obviously, and it's flexible enough that I'm still enjoying my time, even if I have these biases, right? But it does mean that if I never use intimidation, maybe fighting games are not my most favorite games. Makes sense. Yeah.
Right.
And that's interesting to note because there's obviously a sort of preference in game mechanics. Like when something is built into a system, it obviously is important for the system.
It's like the mindset of like, it's in the rule book for a reason, Yeah. That's kind of the energy.
Yeah. And if you're not enjoying that part, then that part of the game is going to work less for you, or you can just ignore it and still have a good time. But then it's obviously not a perfect match because you're not using all of the game to your advantage if you don't like all of the game, right?
Right. You brought up a whole lot of things, and I was like, I want to touch on that. But then you brought up a different good thing.
Sorry.
I'm like, I want to touch on that too. But I want to start with what you just mentioned, which is like the stats that are in the book are there for a reason. They inform what the game is about. And I find that ability scores are often what I lean on to determine the tone of the game. Because, as you said before, Dungeons and Dragons, there's a reason strength and dexterity are stats, because your physical abilities will matter in this game, right? When I look at that, and the way the book describes it is that a 10 on any of these scores is an average person. So if you have a 10 strength, you have an average person strength. 10 int, average person int. Int meaning intelligence, of course. And then the higher you go, the more athletic or impressive or prodigious or genius you are in these certain stats. So if you have like an 18 in intelligence, you're one of the most intelligent people in the world, right? So there's like a scale of how powerful you are, how I don't know what the word is, not like superhuman, but like extra human you are determined, and you choose
how talented kind of,
what characteristic you want to like improve. It's a very like physical, video gamey, like I'm making a character to save the world, right? It's very
like that. Yeah,
it's very strong. But what I did notice, and what I learned as I started reading more games, is that sometimes the attributes are not the traits of a person, but rather how they react to certain situations. So Kids on Brooms was the first one.
That's nice.
That introduced me to this. So their traits are like fight, flight, brains, brawn, wit, charm. And those are, if something happens to you, what are you most likely to lean on in reaction to that?
Yeah.
So say something dangerous happens. Are you going to fight it, or flight, are you going to flee from it? Or like brains, are you going to lean on your intelligence? Or brawn, are you just going to tough through it? And then charm is like, well, you talk your way out of it, right? It's not necessarily your personal like physical and mental levels as much as it is your proclivity to lean towards certain reactions. Yeah, exactly. That's something I found super interesting once I was reading. I'm like, how are they going to manage intelligence and wisdom in this game? Is like, because when you play so much D&D, everything is suddenly coded towards like, like how would you handle this situation? And then you look towards the stats to see like how they would quantify that. So when you say like stats are in this game for a reason, right? When they exist to inform you what the game is about. One of the most important quotes I remember about tabletop RPGs, I think I saw it on Twitter, and I don't know if I'm attributing this to the right person, but I'm just going to give it to him because he's very smart and he has like a blog about this. There's an author designer called Jay Dragon, and Jay Dragon had made games like Wander Home or Yezeba's Bed and Breakfast, which are very wonderful games. He is, I might be misquoting him, so I don't want to say this is him, but it's a great point, and I just want to bring it up that what makes it to a tabletop RPG, like what makes it to the pages of the game, are things that the players need help with. So to understand that, like you look towards Dungeons and Dragons, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of rules about combat, but not a lot of rules about exploration and about role play. The reason for that is because the designers believe that the players don't need help with exploration or role playing. They got that. They got that in the bag. They understand that. What they need help with is understanding the mechanics and rules to a fair fight.
Right. That's interesting, actually.
And that is what they've poured hundreds of pages into.
Yep.
So you look at other games, and you look at games like in the Powered by the Apocalypse sphere, which is like games that are very genre heavy, that lean into a specific story that you're trying to tell, like whether it be heroes or horror or things like that. Mm-hmm. the game, or what makes it to the book, is often very setting heavy, because what the players need is to understand the motifs and the themes and the conceits of the genre. So for people who are not used to running sci-fi games, the game makes sure that you understand that setting. And then the game itself is relatively rules light because they expect you to know how to act once you understand the setting. So it's funny how some games are like, this game is too long, it has too many rules. And some games are like, this is too short, I need more rules. It's so important not just what the game includes, but what they exclude, because that's what the designer assumes you won't need help with. And I thought that when I think of ability scores being one of the core foundations of pushing this idea of what is important about your character, it heavily defines what the game is about as a whole. Every time I read a new game, I think about that exact quote. I'm like, what did the author leave out? And why did they leave it out? It's such an interesting thought. And that it's kind of why I settled on talking about ability scores, because I feel like that's one of the few very consistent foundational aspects of a game that involves numbers at all. If the game has numbers, it probably has some sort of attributes or traits for your character to quantify how good or how bad you are at anything. And to that point, and maybe I'm talking too long on this, if the game leaves out ability scores, it basically levels the playing field of all the characters in terms of quantifying how good or how bad you are. It trusts the player to make those educated decisions to decide, hey, I'm good at this, I'm bad at this. We don't need a number for this. We can just assume I am. And that works in this game. And that's fine. So it's not only the concept of having ability scores, it's also very purposeful to leave them out.
That's such an interesting idea. I don't think I've ever realized that the sort of exclusion of stuff could work like that. And I'm not sure if I agree on it all the time, because sometimes I also feel like it's also a little bit about parameters, right? Like it's a sort of famous thought, right? That play works best, play in literally also like kids play or anything, works best if you have some sort of framework, right? Or you're most creative when you have limits, you know, that kind of idea. I think a game system is very much that. It's sort of the framework for creativity, right? Or the limits to your imagination.
Wow.
That's so cliche. Wow. Okay. But I do agree, even though it's a very cliche thought, but I do agree. Like the way I see it, and I might not be right about this all the time, but the way I often see or start reading a new game is basically as a blank slate, where I'm like, okay, give to me what you got. Give to me where you want me to live for the coming 3 hours, you know? And if you don't specify, I will make it up, or I will not think about it if I don't think about it. Like if I forget to realize it can be part of it, I won't have it in my game. In that way, if you don't specify stuff, it's not going to be the focus of my gameplay. In some ways it is, but in other ways, I don't think I'm always going to be in that assumption mode where I'm like, okay, if you don't specify, I will make up my own. Because sometimes you'll literally not think about it, or you're not realize that it can still be part of a game if it's not specified on the page. And also, this is something, by the way, I had to learn after, years of role play, where it's like, wow, you can also just make up more rules. For instance, when we played Tangled Blessings, I think we did a very extensive version of it because we were having just so much fun, and we were like dragging all our interesting thoughts and backstories and magic or whatever, we drag it into it, and it wasn't all specified. But I didn't realize, I think until maybe that game or maybe before, that you can still sort of add anything you want to a system like that. You can sort of break it open. And same with D&D, right? If you want to spend a whole day freaking traveling and collecting relics from I don't know, you can do it. Like you don't have to not do it because the game doesn't specify it. But I didn't realize that until quite a long time, I think, because it didn't specify that you're quote unquote allowed to break it open or have a break like that where you just collect leaves or whatever,
Collect
so
leaves?
It does work. Yeah, I was thinking like Zelda in my brain, but then I'm like, yeah, that's not.
No, you're right. That's fair. It's valid.
I would like to collect leaves.
I got you. I picked up what you put down.
It's like, we got there at the end. So it is a little bit twofold, I think. And reacting to something you said a little bit earlier, so in terms of playing, I think for me it was the Tangled Blessings game, at least the one that I can think of right now, where it really made it clear for me that you can make it as big as you want or as small as you want. But in terms of watching, I had the same experience with watching As I'm trying really hard to remember what it was like a one shot from Critical Role, and Taliesin Jaffe was running it, and it was a Cthulhu game, I think.
Okay.
It was kind of one of the first games where they were super prop heavy and costume heavy, and it was really good. And there I understood what you were saying before, the mechanic of sanity. They were using it very heavily because the game or the system was, of course, different. And with that game, because of course it was just a really great game, first off, but also because I enjoyed it so much, I also realized, wow, you can, the mechanic of sanity, right? Where you, I think if I remembered correctly, it's either, yeah, wait, does this make sense? Is it like when you have like an X amount of boxes to fill, and if you have like 3 points in sanity or I don't know, 10 points in sanity, you sort of are going mad, right? That's how it works. So every time with a little event.
I'll just trust you on that. I don't think I've played enough Cthulhu to know.
Okay,
that.
I think it was at least something like that. So a certain, you would have a certain build up to insanity, basically. So you would have your sanity, and after an X amount of crazy events happening, you sort of would lose it. And that's kind of the point of Cthulhu, that it is about this sort of weird mind games, horror, whatever. And in that game, they used that mechanic, and I had never seen something like that before, and it worked amazing because the game was great and the system was perfect for the game they wanted to play, right? And then I realized, okay, so if you want your game to go a certain way, like your game mechanics don't have to just be sort of the default from which you can start off. It doesn't just have to be the baseline. It can also be a sort of arc, almost like a sort of plot point device where, in this case, if you have an X amount of crazy events happening, which definitely will be the case because that's the whole point of the game, you're already kind of knowing that all of your characters will either die or just end up super frazzled at the end, right? If you're lucky.
Right.
And that whole sort of, yeah, I'm doing like that motion, what's the word? Like story,
I see the hand.
Story arc, you know? That, yeah. The beginning versus end kind of thing is also an amazing mechanic that I never realized would be so cool because I only play D&D and stuff. And in D&D, you don't really have something like that. You don't really have a sort of ticking time bomb kind of thing, right? So it was my first sort of exposure to game design being so fitting to the game, but also to a storyline like that. And I think it also made me realize that if you specify something like this, it will inform your game. And I think that's super interesting.
That's one of the number one things I learned from reading other games. Some game designers get so creative how numbers like move and operate.
Fun.
Like there's an emotional difference between rolling 2d8 versus 4d4. Like the different dice like have different emotions attached to them.
Oh, wow.
That I don't think people understand. This could be its own episode. I might go on a little bit of a rant here and I'll chop it down in post if it gets too long. But there's a concept in Kids on Brooms called exploding dice. And exploding dice is all of your stats have a d4, a 4-sided die, or an 8-sided die, or 12-sided die, or 20-sided die. They're purposely different sizes, right? And the 20-sided die obviously has the highest potential of rolling very high versus a d4. Yep. But a d4, a 4-sided die, has the chance to explode. They don't call it explosion. They call it like lucky break or something. If you roll the maximum amount on the die, you get to roll it again and add that onto your initial roll. Now, even though the 4-sided die is the smallest, it has the highest chance of exploding. And exploding, when you roll again, is really fun. So you could, so exploding on a D20 is so rare. It almost never happens, but exploding on a D4 happens all the time. So when I get a chance to roll the D4, it's super fun. and there's
that's nice.
Adding an emotional quality to dice rolls is a very, very real thing. And like the building pressure that you described when it comes to like increasing like the sanity levels in Call of Cthulhu or whatever that mechanic might be, that's also very common. Like there are some games you'll read it and you'll be like, oh, the way the rules are laid out, dying is inevitable.
They will end up here for sure.
I will die over the course of this game. It's not like an if. It's not like I will survive somehow. No, I'm going to die. How that happens is actually the game.
Yeah.
There's also games that rely on, they call it falling block towers because of copyright, but some games truly revolve around a tower of Jenga.
Right.
Whenever you do something, you pull a block, and that rising pressure of this tower becoming more and more unstable is a physical manifestation. I guess is not the word I'm looking for, but a physical representation of how tense the game is getting, how precarious your situation is in canon. So this idea of ability scores is just an extension of the game designer's intent for the game. What are these scores supposed to tell us about the game we're playing? How are they being used? Do they change and how much? And if they change, what does that mean for your character? Are these drastic changes in your character? Like if someone's intelligence suddenly drops, it's a huge impetus to change how your character acts or perceives things or understands things. So how those numbers are playing around with informs you, oh, this is how the game designer intends for me to experience this game. And then we use our own creativity to delineate from that. And again, oh my gosh, this topic is so big because I think about it every time I read a new game.
It makes sense. Yep.
We just talked about, like you just brought up our game Entangled Blessings, which we've mentioned many times on this podcast. Great game. Try it out. But to very quickly summarize it, it's a gothic academia magic game. And there's two people who play it and there are no ability scores. You read the prompts and you act it out. And it's more like, it's as if two people are improvising together on a stage. That's basically the energy of Tangled Blessings. Now, I am currently running a Tangled Blessing game in that setting, but I'm using the rules of Kids on Brooms. And as I said before, Kids on Brooms has a 6-stat system. Now, why would I add the 6-stat system into a game that previously didn't need ability scores or attributes? The reason for that is because there's a very different dynamic between 2 people and 4 people plus a game master. When there's 5 people clashing, I felt the need to make situations feel more fair, to leave situations up to chance and not say, actually, I just beat you, or actually my NPC is just stronger. I wanted them to feel the victories of conquering something that seems insurmountable that comes with these multiple player games. So in the context of the game that I was running, stats were useful. Stats are useful, because they quantify how individual characters are improving upon themselves in a way that they can all understand each other, rather than just 2 people having to infer from each other, hey, I'm actually this strong, or hey, I'm actually this strong.
Right.
Like the less abstract the system is by putting a foundation of numbers, the easier it is to convey certain ideas and move forward certain storylines. Like that was a conscious decision. And that is just one example. Ability scores is just one example of how game design informs the story that comes of it. And that's how it ties into storytelling. As I
all connected.
That big old rainbow loop back to the first sentence.
Yep.
Right.
It's definitely an infinite bagel. Yep.
An infinite bagel is exactly how I describe it. Yeah.
Great topic. Oh my God. Yeah, there's so much to go on here, right? Like we can just keep talking forever, honestly. It's so foundational as well. There's such a big difference literally in just the feel of something. Like if you have to specify your character based on, well, I don't know, if they smell or not, you're like, what is this going to mean for the game? You know?
Right. Imagine.
Yeah. You can go so funky with it. I mean, Tiny Dragon is pretty funky, IMO, but there's so much potential as well. Like, what do you want to specify and where do you want them to go? Or why do you want this to matter? Right. That's also a thing. Yeah. And I think based on if your game is more like a narratively complete thing, if I'm thinking about like the Cthulhu sort of having an endpoint, either being insane or dead or something like that, or when something's literally like the Jenga tower's gonna fall, you know, and then the game ends. If that's so inherently part of a game, you're gonna also play differently. And if that means you have to specify your stats different or things are more important than other things, it keeps sort of rolling back into each other. And I think that's also very nice.
Yeah.
And one of the like best things about game design, because it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to make a fun game, right?
It
so
sure
if you
is.
do it right, it's so great.
Boy, oh boy, it sure is.
Yeah. You should know by now, yeah.
I'll read games. I'll be so impressed. I'm like, I would have never in a million years thought of this system, thought of these rules. Food for thought.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're not in the tabletop RPG sphere, and all of this is just kind of jargon to you, that's okay.
Sorry.
Just understand. Yeah, I apologize. Maybe this isn't the episode for you. But if you are, and this got you thinking.
I mean, honestly, even if you're not, please just go try it out. I didn't realize how much this is basically making up stories, improvising. I mean, we've talked about this before, obviously, but just because we're very like specific about it already, like we've done a bunch of games, doesn't mean you shouldn't try it out because it's really fun and we didn't know anything about it before as well. So please just have a go at it, even if you have no clue what's happening. It's too good to not try out, honestly.
Yeah. And for the uninitiated, there's so many games that are only like 1 or 2 pages long. That's all you really need.
Yes.
Like I would recommend personally Goat Crashers is fun. We just plays a bunch of goats.
Love that.
Precious Things is something I recently read. It's intended for younger audiences where you play as these tiny dragons just trying to hoard up your favorite things. And I guess I could recommend like Honey Heist. Honey Heist is pretty good. It's also by the same person who made Goat Crashers.
So where do you find them?
You could find them on itch.io. Itch.io, you go to the physical game section And there's a bunch of games that are just free. A lot of the one-page ones are free just simply because, they're great.
Yeah.
Now with that, I'm going to bounce over to the prompt.
Important.
Let's talk about the prompt. And again, Merla does not know what this prompt is. She's going to be improvising what this is on the spot. I'm not going to give you a story prompt, so there's nothing for you to like act out or narrate. I just want to go back to our roots, and I want to give you a world building prompt.
Ooh.
A situation that the world exists in, and you just tell me the ramifications of this being a reality. Okay. Are you ready?
So ready.
Okay. So the 6 stats from Dungeons and Dragons. Strength, dexterity. I'm not used to saying their whole name.
Yeah.
Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Usually I just go in Whizca and people know.
Yep.
That's so funny. In the world, the stat of a person that's the highest will appear above their head at all times. What does that mean for the world?
Oh, dang. Okay. That's so complex. And we're using the D&D stats, you said, right?
The D&D. Well, you're going to stick with the D&D stats. So strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma.
Yes.
The highest of those 6 will be above your head at all times.
Like, I don't want to go all the way into this because I don't feel like I'm the one that's supposed to be talking about it, but it's going to be also, it's similar to like genes, right? Where stuff is like partially the sort of famous nature versus nurture argument, right? Where part of it is you inherit it. So if my dad is a great fighter, I have a great possibility of also being a great fighter.
Right.
So if his strength is high, my strength is high. Supposed to be higher. If my parents are just real trashy and they don't have any good stuff about them, I'm gonna most likely have to work very hard to sort of level up to like average statistics because I have bad genes. This is a very strange example, but hear me out. Well, okay, here's a question. Does it also say the stat, or is it just like if my strength is 20, does it say strength 20, or does it just say strength?
It'll say strength 20.
Okay, with a number. Okay,
the stat and
then
the
it
numbers.
Changes. Okay.
Again, on the scale for people who don't play, 10 is average, quote unquote average, whatever that means, and 20 is the highest you could possibly be. Tippity top. If someone has a 20, that's just impressive no matter what stat it is.
Yes. Okay, I'm just going to spitball some ideas here.
Yeah.
First off, before you said the number's going to show, I was also going to be like, it doesn't really matter if you're super bad at it or super good at it. If it just says strength, like someone will always be the best at something in their 6 stats, right?
Of course.
But that doesn't go. So this changes it a little bit. If you find this thing super important, socially important, professionally important, if you're an adventurer, which is usually the deal at D&D, in D&D, you're going to super max out one of them, right? It's kind of what you do. If it says strength 20 above your head, everyone who needs someone strong is going to hire you.
It's true.
If you are then super bad at everything else and literally an idiot, it won't really matter because they're not seeing that from the top of your head. It's not literally written above your head.
That's an interesting thought, right? Like, there are benefits to being more of an all-rounder sometimes.
Yeah, there's many benefits, but not in this. Yeah, it's not going to show.
If you have like a 14 intelligence and a 13 everywhere else, you're be
a great
visually,
character. Yeah,
you'll be visibly less impressive than an 18 intelligence character with like 8s and 7s across the board and everything else. But they'll never know, right? They'll never know.
Yeah.
Until they talk to you, then they know.
Yeah. Just don't talk ever, It's kind of 2 ways of going, right? So either the society is built on the fact that you can see it, which is not too different from just being a muscular dude, right?
Sure.
In this world where you don't have strength written above your head. If you look super strong,
it's written on your bicep.
Yeah, that's famous. Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah, for sure. If you physically look super strong, people might hire you more if they need a strong guy because they can see you have at least a lot of muscles. It doesn't always say something about strength, but very often it does. So in that case, it is similar in sort of a like first impressions kind of thing, or in a sort of what's on your CV kind of thing. How many credits you got. But then again, it doesn't count for everything, right? You can't see how intelligent someone is from their physique. I mean, charismatic a little bit, but how wise someone is from their physique. I mean, you can look like a hippie, but you can still be like an idiot hippie, In that case, it does reveal something that you might not see from like actual physique. It's also interesting because you can't really con your way out of it, right? As well. Because some people really present differently than what they actually are, because either they want to be perceived a different way or they just don't vibe with their natural, I guess, abilities, you know? Yeah.
Like I'm thinking about like research scientist jobs, which is, commonly attributed to like intelligence. If you walk in for an interview and your highest stat is like charisma, right?
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah, I was thinking of it.
What will they think of you, right?
It's going to be a bit shady, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then if you're just a super charismatic person who's also very intelligent, that's not going to show above your head.
No, it won't.
If your charisma is 18 if your charisma is 20 and your intelligence is 19, you're not going to see it. You're just going to see charisma 20.
Yeah, but you never see it, right? That's just the reality of us, just in
Yeah,
general,
it's
right?
true.
You never know until unless you see the accolades or the achievements or things like that. And just spitballing again, this then speaks to, all right, then how does the universe quantify these stats, right? Who's defining?
Yeah, by the way, yeah.
Who's there in the
we didn't even
cosmos?
talk about
Who's
that.
watching from the stars, being like, actually,
Group
I
17.
think this guy what he knows, that's a 17 for sure.
And
right?
also, if you have two guys that are both intelligence 17, is one going to still be smarter? Are they going to be exactly equal?
No, they're going to be equally
smart. Is there
smart.
going to be like,
clearly,
0.5s? That's not a thing
No,
in
of course
D&D.
not.
It doesn't
No,
count.
no.
But then still, they're going to be different, right? I mean, according to the stats, they're not, right?
But people in the sports world are going to be like, oh, these guys are 215s, but he's a 15.9. Like,
Yeah,
you could
it's
just
definitely
tell,
going to be like
right?
a social thing now where it's like, yeah, the stats this, but like if we would specify, yeah.
Headlines, Dex 14 wins 800-meter race over Dex 20. It's like a big thing,
That's also true. I didn't even take into account that not always the stats match up with all your achievements. Because in D&D, even if you have great stats, you can roll an at 1 and then you still suck, right?
This is true.
I mean, is it like a full D&D world or is it just like random stats above your head?
just our world with the numbers.
Plus stats.
Right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it feels kind of Black Mirror, kind of dystopian.
For sure, yeah. To me, it feels a little bit like a combination of like printing out your CV real big and then listing all the languages or something.
Wearing it on your back.
Yeah, like everyone wears his CV on their backs. And also of like a documentary I saw recently, which was very terrible, good documentary, terrible situation about sort of the teen model culture in Russia and that everyone's just very poor and sort of wanting a better life, so they go into modeling. And then they had this is a weird tangent, sorry, but like they had the whole sort of a giant room full of like young girls that are like listed on like how tall they are and what their number is and how far they live away from the city or something like that. And then I'm like, oh my god, it's so terrible because it doesn't say anything, but then to all these weird evil like modeling scout people it means so much, and then it just feels terrible because they all want a better future. And it has the same vibe to me where it's like, what if you're just from a terrible, or I guess in this case, dumb family, and you have big dreams? What if you have big dreams and a great talent for learning, right? You start off with intelligence 5 or whatever, and you crawl up all the way to freaking 12 or something. People who are born intelligence 14 are going to be super lazy, but they're still going to feel better than you, even though you deserve it so much more because you worked your ass off.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what does that say? It's a very complicated.
It's stepping into the territory of like education is a privilege kind of situation.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
And then again, the universe quantifies what that means. So it's like, okay, if this kid knows everything about the farm in incredible detail, is that intelligence? Is he up there? What does that qualify as? And then people have to be like, well, he's an intelligence 14, but intelligence in what? Then it begs all those questions.
I mean, it's the same thing with CVs, right? Like some people like cannot finish a school or an education for the life of them, but they're great people. They're super smart and intelligent. They just don't learn well, right? But then on your CV is going to look shitty or, very black and white, of course. But like, you're not going to have proper academic credits because you didn't finish any schools, but then you're still going to be great at the stuff you need to be great at. But you're not going to see that from your CV. So if you're intelligent, but you're not intelligent in the sort of way that the stat means, which I don't know what that means right now, but does it reflect at all? Is it like the ultimate truth of the universe? Or is it like, I can't even finish the sentence, but yeah.
And to kind of close this prompt, we're going to touch on something we talked about. Do these quote unquote ability scores existing in our reality detail to us what's important about our lives, or do we have the onus to deny the importance of ability scores and simply evaluate ourselves beyond those parameters.
Also true. It's like the, what's her name again? Luisa, I think, from the Encanto movie, where it's like, okay, I'm real fucking strong, but that's not my only personality. Like, please also talk to me about other stuff. I love other stuff as well, aside from that I am just super freaking strong. Yeah.
Food for thought.
Food for thought, man. I mean, yeah, we could unravel this forever, I think, because it's very, very broad.
And that's our cue to end the episode.
Hey.
Thank you guys for listening to Your Rivers Are Wrong, the podcast. I spoiled it. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I'm keeping that in. We're going to roll with it. If you want to reach out to us, we are readily available at our Gmail, yourriversarewrong@gmail.com. And as you continue to world build and story tell and decide if ability scores are important for that story you're trying to tell or not, always keep these two things in mind. One, do not let your ability scores define who you are to be in this world, in this life. Crazy cosmic thought. And two, your rivers are wrong.
You just dropped it out there?
Best of luck. Goodbye. Have a good one. See you next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Rivers Are Wrong. If you have ideas for topics, prompts, or you just want to share your thoughts, please reach us at yourriversarewrong@gmail.com. That's yourriversarewrong@gmail.com. Also, a big thanks to Maarten Schellekens, who created the intro and outro music for our podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening. We hope to see you at the next one. Bye.